you. And to everyone, appreciate the opportunity. I think Stephen went through a very good presentation and overview of understanding how you are to document the different aspects of your work-related injuries. Now we're talking about what can you do so you can minimize the negative impact of those injuries. And that's really what our goal is when you look at the 4 steps to a successful injury management program is what can you do as a company so that these injuries don't negatively impact you. And really from our standpoint, a lot of it's developing a strong foundation, and managing a work-related injury doesn't start when the injury occurs. It starts long before that. Our goal is always, with a good program, is to lower your cost per incident, to eliminate unnecessary recordable events, as Stephen talked about. What triggers a recordable, what doesn't? Well, if you have different pieces of information, you have a well-constructed program, definitely those are things that can help. Reducing your lost time from work because of the things that you have in place, like more defined job descriptions, how you have a light duty program, things like that, as well as making sure that your employees have the ability to get rapid care when they need it. And that's a big thing. Myself personally, I came from the safety side of things. I've been working in Ahmed now for over 20 years. And I was really surprised at the timing of when an employee that is injured gets treatment, how it significantly changes the plan of care associated. And if you, as the employer, develop a program and they are able to get immediate medical attention 24 hours a day, then it's going to make it where you're going to have more cases keep under that first aid umbrella versus triggering recordables. So we want to make sure that we establish a well-defined reporting policy. Do your employees even know how to report an incident? Do they understand the time parameters around that? When we write policies, we always recommend that an injury should be reported within 15 minutes of the event. And that really starts setting that culture so that we can provide that immediate medical attention. Making sure that we understand the job descriptions. What are those essential functions? What are the physical requirements? The frequency in which they perform these tasks. This is really important because when you look at developing a plan of care, the more information the treating clinician has, the better they can position themselves to understand how they can approach the injury. So making sure you have well-defined job descriptions is very important. And then, of course, lastly on this side of things is make sure you have a good clinic network in there to support you. I know a lot of companies will use teletriage and clinic in conjunction with each other, but it's really important that you identify, audit, and set up a good clinic network to support your activities, whether you're working under OSHA regulations or MSHA or FRA. Make sure these clinics understand those industry segments. Make sure that, if you're the kind of company who has potential exposures and you work with chemicals, do they understand how to evaluate SDS sheets? These are all part of that evaluation process so that you make sure that you have as many positive outcomes as possible. The second part of it is the remote care, teletriage. Teletriage has advanced significantly over the years, and it's a wonderful tool. When you look at it, what are some of the benefits of teletriage? Well, the biggest thing is that when you look at it, you're looking at typically it's about 50 to 60% the cost of clinic-based treatment, so it's lower cost. Typically with regular teletriage versus telemedicine, all of the plans of care developed under teletriage fall under the first aid umbrella, whether it's OSHA, MSHA, and so forth. So now the nice thing is, not only are you making the treatment at a lower cost, you're also doing it where you're not having the negative impact of triggering a recordable event. The other part that comes into play is that it is also then, if you use teletriage effectively, you typically will self-pay those direct yourself as the employer, which means you're filing less claims with your insurance carrier, which is going to significantly reduce your experience modification rate as well. And then, of course, lastly, not only are you providing your employees 24/7 access to licensed medical professionals, But for those minor injuries and incidents, you're minimizing the time that your employees are away from the job site. And especially after hours, especially if you're working in a remote location, if you're able to handle something through teletriage and that employee is now away from the job site for, let's just say, anywhere between 15 and 30 minutes, versus if they had to go to the clinic and they're driving a half hour there, they're at the clinic for an hour and a half and they drive a half hour back. Think about it from a productivity standpoint, not to mention even like during after hours, you may be taking a supervisor off the floor. So there's a lot of impact that teletriage, when utilized properly, can really benefit you. And we're a big advocate of teletriage. We've seen the benefits that it can have in the workplace. Next is making sure that you do rely on the experts, making sure you have that good support system in place, finding a partner with the ability to minimize the negative impact of work-related injuries. Stephen really, I think, laid out a lot of the different aspects of things on how to document it, which I think is really important, as far as navigating those guidelines. But there's a lot of other things that come into play is there are a lot of things that will come into the treatment of an injury. Or was it a situation where it was a work-related, was there cause and effects directly to a work-related event? The other part of it is making sure that you have somebody who's managing your clinic network on your behalf, that's a medical professional that's looking out for your best interest as not only your patient advocate, but your advocate as the employer. So if you look at these different things, you want to have that subject matter expertise at hand to help you with that, and it'll help you reduce social recordable events. It'll shorten that treatment duration time. It'll improve communication, documentation, analysis. And the best thing is, at the end of the day, your employees are going to feel like they have an advocate through the process, which is very important, because if there's anything I've learned, if your employees feel like they're getting the optimal care from their employer, chances are that they are going to be more compliant to the plan of care. They're going to adhere to things. They're going to be more welcoming participant, and they're just going to have a different attitude. And I think that's really important with a lot of these injury programs, is there can be a good balance between patient care and looking out for the interests of the client company. And I think that's one thing you have to look at with this, is how can you optimize the clinic outcomes? And I think having that subject matter expertise to work with both sides definitely could be a benefit. As I always say, injury management never stops. It really doesn't. And that's one of the biggest things that we look at is that how do we learn from the information that's provided to us? We believe in a lot of trend analysis. What is the root cause of the injury? And when you see trends and tendencies, if you have all of a sudden you see that, why are we sustaining the same type of shoulder injury when people are doing a task? Well, maybe we need to evaluate how that task is being performed. And, this is one of the benefits we have at Examinetics, is we have a certified ergonomist on staff, and he has been instrumental in reducing injuries. And that's kind of what we're looking at is, we want to treat the initial injury the way it's presented to us, but how do we take that information so that we can hopefully reduce and prevent injuries from happening in the front end, which is where that trend analysis comes into place. Making sure that we're not putting employees in a position where injuries can occur. It's amazing how often I look at these job descriptions and, they'll say anything over 50 pounds is an assisted lift and all these different aspects, which is great. But then when we go out in the field, we see that people are lifting 75, 100 pounds by themselves all day long. You got to make sure that the workforce matches the job duties. You got to make sure that we're not putting our employees in a position to get hurt because of our failures. And, things change in the field. They change on a regular basis. And the problem is that as processes change, as operational structures change and so forth, within that being said, it's our responsibility as the employer to monitor those things, make sure we update job descriptions, update that, this needs to be now a 2-person task versus a single-person task, and so forth. And I think that's really important, is to understand that is part of that reducing future injuries, is we always have got to be constantly monitoring those things. Because if we do that from a post-injury management standpoint, it's beyond just how we better manage those work-related injuries. It's how can we reduce or prevent future injuries from happening as well. And that's really the goal of a well-structured program, is we're looking at it from start to finish.